So we're just going to do a normal new project. And I'm just going to make a single application view. The thing that we're going to build is literally just going to be a white screen that prints out some stuff to the console. Where you're going to drive this bus over the weekend between now and Tuesday is I want you to make you're going to do a little exercise where you're going to identify 3 to 5 of your favorite locations in the world. You're going to make a little table of them, and then you're going to list into that table, print the distance that the user currently is from those locations. Okay, so that's where you're going to have to figure out how to do between now and Tuesday, given what I'm giving you. So as we're watching, just look for things that you're going to have to remember. Okay, so the very first thing that we got to do is ask the user for permission to use their location data, and we have to tell Xcode to bundle the location services. Just like the watch connectivity stuff was a whole mess of code that you have to import, it doesn't normally come along for the ride, location stuff is the same deal. Because again, like we talked about before, think about how complex location stuff is. It's doing things like it knows how to interpret multiple GPS chips depending on which hardware that the software is running on. Or if the device doesn't have GPS or it has GPS turned off, it knows how to look up their location based on Wi-Fi triangulation. All of that kind of stuff is abstracted away from you, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's a ridiculously large amount of complexity that you don't have to concern yourself with, which is awesome. The downside is it isn't automatic. You got to tell it you want it. And so to do that is very simple. We're just going to go into the view controller for the project. And instead of just importing UIKit, we're also going to import core location. And this just simply says, hey, I want all the core location stuff. This actually doesn't do anything at all out of the gate. All it does is says, I eventually will be using location data. We haven't set it up to actually use set location data. So before we can actually use the location data, we have to ask the user for permission. And to do that, we have to do 2 things that you're not used to doing. One is triggering the little alert box that says allow or not. And 2 is we have to tell it what we want that alert box to say. Okay? So if you were using core location and you were building for anything lower than iOS 8, I think, you don't need to include the question. It just simply used to say, will you allow this after location? Now it says, will you allow this after location? It's doing this with it. And you provide some text as to what you're going to be doing with it. It's worth noting that this location data, Apple's very serious about privacy. And so this location data, is definitely in the top 3 to 5. This is private information. We want to keep it secure. And you're on Apple's, what's an appropriate way of saying this? Bad list if you break this rule, okay? So if in that text you're describing what you're doing with that location data, and then either in app review or in complaints from users, Apple discovers you're doing something different than what you're saying you're doing with that location data, you're not only will the app get removed, but there's been plenty of developers that have been banned from the Apple Store. Okay. Now, sure, there's a ways around that, but you don't want to be that person. Okay. So just be aware this is not just something you just kind of laugh at. It is a serious thing that you need to be careful with if you're going to launch for real. So to do that, we're going to do 2 different things. The first is we're going to tell the app that we're going to start using locations, and the second is we're going to populate what that question box is going to say. So the first thing I need to do is say, right out of the gate, I want to create a variable, and that's going on an object. It's not just like I'm holding strings or numbers or floats or whatever in other contexts. In this context, I'm holding a location manager object. And location managers have a ton of methods built into them and a ton of properties that you can get out. We'll look at a couple of them right now, but you can do things like as simple as give me a location. But there's also a ton of other stuff built into location managers that are actually really pretty slick. You can do stuff like say, give me the distance between these 2 locations. And it doesn't just simply do the distance equation that you learned, the square root of a plus b squared, square root of a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Like, or forget the square root part, but you remember that from like Mr. Schumacher's 7th grade geometry class, okay? That actually doesn't work with location data because that's assuming a flat surface. The curvature of the Earth changes location data because it's not, we don't live on a map, we live on a sphere. And so like figuring out the distance between two locations is actually kind of complex. All of that is abstracted away for you because that's baked into location managers. There's a whole lot of other things that are baked into location managers. It's just worth noting that's useful. All right, so we're saying, hey, I want to create a location manager. That still won't do anything yet. That's just creating a variable that holds an empty location manager. We have to start saying, okay, we're going to use that, and that's what triggers the first time we ever use that. It's not whenever it's used in the app. It's the first view controller that is used will trigger the thing that says, do you want to allow this app to use whatever? That's worth noting because you could have an app where 90% of the functionality doesn't need location. But if you want to go past a certain point, you need location. That's at that point you can make the user trigger that question. It's kind of what's best from a user experience standpoint. Do you want to ask for all that stuff the first time the user ever launches the app, or do you want to show them some value first before you and earn trust before you ask for the location data? Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to use my location manager and request authorization. And I'm going to do that in this view controller's UDID-load. It does two things. First, we're taking our location data and we're saying, we talked about delegates before. I'm saying, hey, there's a delegate for this location manager, and it is this view controller. It is this self that we're in. It's throwing an error message for the same reason that delegates have thrown an error message in the past, which is, hey, this is just a view controller. It's not something that's allowed to manage locations. So we got to enable that superpower in a moment. But then it takes that location manager and runs the method request always authorization. There's another request that's for just in-app authorization. But for our purposes, to make our lives a little bit easier, we're going to give this app constant authorization to location data. This method right here is the magic thing that causes the pop-up that says allow or don't allow thing. So let's fix our first red box and then we'll see where we go. And to do that, I just need to simply extend my view controller to not just be a UI view controller, but also to be something that can manage locations. And that's CL location manager delegate, which means core location, which is CL, core location, location, department under redundancy department. Core location manager delegate, meaning this thing that we've called view controller is not just a UI view controller, it is also something that can handle location data. And that makes the delegate red light go away, and now we're good. And then I'll run into a giant roadblock. So I'm going to build to simulator, run the app, and bad things will happen. Because I haven't told the app, it doesn't do anything. You can see it crashes down here, or it writes out to the console what's happening. But my app won't work because it's attempted to it says this app is attempted to access privacy-sensitive data without a usage description. The app's info.plist must contain NS location always usage description key with a string value explaining to the user how the app uses this data. That is nerdy technical speak for, hey, we need to show a little alert box that says, are you going to allow it or not? What do you want to explain how it's being used? And where we put that is in something that we haven't messed with before in this class, which is the plist file. The plist file describes a ton of stuff about the app, including things like the app's name and how it should display on Springboard and all that kind of stuff. Additionally, sometimes we need to add extra stuff to it, and this is saying, hey, you need to add something called NS location always usage description. NS location just is, remember next, we talked about that like in the first week of this class, next computing, that just stands for next script, which is old school stuff. This is one of those things they haven't gotten around to cleaning up yet in Apple's development team. But I need to create a thing called NS location always usage description. So I'm just going to copy that out, go to my plist, and this is the generic standard stuff for your plist file that does things like what's the supported OS, blah, 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 blah. Every once in a while, I need to add something new to it. And to do that, you just right-click and hit Add Row. And it can have a whole lot of stuff inside of here that you can add to it. Because I'm too lazy to find it inside of that list, I'm just going to paste in that thing that it asked for. Hit Return. And it'll look it up for me. And so it interprets what you have pasted as privacy-location, always use, blah, 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 blah. And then in this area, and I'm going to say it defaults to string, which is what I want to tell it, which is I'm going to give it a string of data, or a string of text. And so right here is where I'm going to type in what the user is going to see when that alert box pops up. You can type whatever you want in there, and that's just going to be what pops up with the alert box. Again, I'm being jokey, but you need to do this for real with good text that actually describes to the user in a very clear way what you're doing with the location data, because if you don't, then Apple will hunt you down and break your kneecaps. All right. Now that I have that, I can build it. And it will run, and it won't do anything, but at least it runs. And doesn't throw an error message, except it asks for my location data. Okay, which is pretty cool. It won't for this for now on in this demo in this simulator. So I'm simulating iPhone 7 Plus right now running iOS 10.3. If I generate a new simulator like we looked at on Tuesday, then it will ask for this again. But once I hit allow, it'll always be running as if the user has granted permission for forever. Same reason why when you launch an app on your phone and ask for that, it only asks for it once. And now I have access to it. If you're testing and you ever accidentally hit the wrong button, don't worry, you're not screwed. All you need to do is go over to the settings, just like if this was a real phone, and hit Privacy, Location Services, and these are all the apps that you've granted location, and it will list other ones that you haven't granted location. You can re-grant location to it. Okay, so we have the ability to read the location. Let's go ahead and read what I'm going to do is read the location, the user's location, and just print it out, and just simple print. When it prints it out, it's going to give me a whole lot of stuff, and you'll see it. It's going to give me longitude, it's going to give me a date stamp, and it's going to give the level of fidelity. In other words, how confident is this location? So if it's within a kilometer, you might want to do something different than, and it's a walking app. That might be a very different location data read than if it's within 10 meters. So to do that, I'm just going to keep it on view did load. And I'm going to simply print the user's location. And so it's going into the location manager and running the app and looking at the attribute location. I'm getting a warning light on that, or I should get a warning light. Yep. I'm getting a warning light on that because print is a string, and the thing that I'm feeding it is way more than a string. It's a whole object containing a whole lot of different stuff. Because location doesn't just mean location. Location means a ton of things. And so I'm getting a red, orange light on that. That's okay, because once I run it, the console will do its best to interpret it, and you'll see what it looks like. And it's saying your location is at longitude 39.5, blah, 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 latitude negative 84, blah, 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 and I think it's accurate within plus or minus 5 meters in every direction. It thinks my user is moving at 1 miles per hour, or negative 1 miles per hour just means you're not moving. It doesn't have a course, means it doesn't have a string of points that says you're moving in a particular heading. It gives me a date stamp, and it says that you're in this time. It gives me a date stamp according to a given time zone. Okay, so where is 39 point blah, 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 blah? Where is that? If you just simply copy and paste that out into Google Maps or into Google, it'll interpret it for you. And so it thinks I'm right here, which is where I am. Now, my phone or my computer does not have location data in it because it doesn't have a GPS. How does it know where I am? It knows where I am because I told it that already. And how you do that is in the simulator, if you go debug location, you can put in a custom location. By default, your computer, your Mac will do the cell phone triangulation and drop in a latitude and longitude. You can put in any location you want there. And that will just basically tell the little simulated phone that you're in this location, even if you're really not. Or if you're lazy, you can just say, I want to tell it that I'm an apple. And then when I run it again, it'll give me apples longitude and latitude. Sound good? Cool. Okay, let's build the next thing, which is, okay, I can read the location right when the app runs, but that is limited usefulness, right? Like that's if you want to know where the nearest Kroger's is, okay? But if you're building a workout app that has running functionality, you want to be able to constantly be checking the user's location. Or if you want to run behind the scenes and do certain things when users do cross certain geofences and that sort of business, then you're going to need to be able to do something else. And that is the significant change in location stuff. So let's add that. So, I forgot to mention this. Right here, you can also set how accurate you want the read to be. And that works along with distance filter. When you're reading an individual location, this stuff is useful to set. There's a bunch of other things you can set this to. See this K, CLL, location accuracy, and I'm saying within hundreds of meters is the accuracy that I care about. There's a couple other settings you can use for this. So if you're building like a driving app or something like that, or an airplane app or a train app or something like that that is moving much faster, you can set this to kilometers rather than hundreds of meters. And that'll use way less battery and it's just nicer. So you can Google that if you want to have more information on that stuff or on desired accuracy. Or you can just go in Xcode. Let's see, if you hold down Command and click on any of these attributes, it'll give you a little write-up as to what some of these options are. Okay. Now that is useful if you're doing a single location read, which is what I've been doing, which I'm in the wrong. We haven't built that yet, so I'm going to put this over here. That is useful for doing what we just did, which is getting a single read of a location. If you want to do the other stuff, which is significant change in location or the geofence stuff where you're watching for do they cross a particular boundary. So for instance, that last one, for instance, I carry a pocket knife with me, and I always forget to take my pocket knife out when I go to Kings Island and when I go to the airport. So I have a reminder set on my phone with a geofence drawn around Kings Island and around the airport that just fires a reminder that says, remember to take out your pocket knife every single time, because I always will forget. That is a great example of geolocation stuff where you can build an app or you can, behind the scenes, create these geofences where you say, hey, this location within this radius, fire whenever the user enters or exits this geofence. That's something that, again, we're not going to talk about today, but it's something that's possible. So both constantly watching for significant changes in location or entering or exiting different geofences, both of those two things, this is ignored. Desired accuracy and desired filter. Because they're these things that always run in the background. And so Apple is doing their best, the phone will do its best based on how much charge is left in the phone. It even is based on what the temperature, the temperature of the device is. So if it's a really, really hot day and the chips are overheated, it won't get as accurate as a read as a normal day. Those kinds of things, these weird fluctuations that you don't need to think about, they're just baked into the OS, will change desired accuracy and desired filter on you. You have no control over it. Okay? It's completely ignored in these other settings. Yeah?
So how does it like just automatically run in the background?
How does it automatically what?
How does it like run in the background? Like how do you make that work? Does it just automatically do it? Or
Yep. We'll see it actually.
Okay. So you don't have to like open the app. It's just like you can exit out of the app and then it just automatically.
Yeah, there's a handful of. This is not true for watch apps, other than the couple examples that we talked about on Tuesday. But in both in iPad and iPhone, there's a couple of different ways you're allowed to do run in the background. And location data is one of those things you're allowed to run in the background. So, and a better way of thinking about it, rather than your app is running in the background, is to think of it as there is a central location manager that all apps are using, and it's keeping track of which apps care what your location is. Does that make sense? And then when your location, one of these trigger events happen, then it knows to run your app in the background. And then once it's done that, it kills your app to save RAM and battery life and all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's a better way of thinking about it. Rather than your app is running in the background, it's really not. It's just saying, I care about location, so when these things happen, let me know. Does that make sense?
Sure.
That distinction makes sense? Okay. Other examples of that would be like music apps are allowed to run in the background. So you can hit play on Spotify, go to another app, and it's still playing your music. That's an example of an app that's running in the background. But that's using another similar service where there's a central sound repository, and you're just feeding it stuff. And then you get alerts when different things change in there.
Yeah, but
Right.
like what if you have to, like you kill the entire task, right? So like you don't click on the home button, you swipe it up, does that stop?
That's a great question. I'm pretty sure that even if the user kills it, it still is performing this stuff. The only real way to kill it is to uninstall the app. Once it's registered as always notify. Okay, so let's do the, what was the next thing we were doing? Oh, significant location changes. So I'm gonna leave this stuff here, but for our purposes, I'm just gonna comment it out. If it was still there, it's fine. It's just that the next thing we're gonna do would ignore that data, or ignore your requests. I'm just gonna keep it in our code so you can see it when I give you the file. And we're gonna do the next thing, which is constantly watch for significant changes. So once the user has allowed the app to do what we want it to do, we now have the ability to run start updating location. And start updating location just registers this app with that central repository that whenever there's a location change, I want to know about it. Okay? Any location change. Or this is doing is firing GPS and saying, keep it firing. This next line is the one that does what I was just mentioning, which is start monitoring significant location changes, meaning anytime the user goes someplace new that's different, I want to know about it. Okay? Cool. Now that's awesome, but how do we actually know that this is happening? And so we're going to do something that I'm sure you've done in other programming languages, but we haven't actually done in this class, which is we need to make some asynchronous called functions, which means we're going to run some functions outside of the normal flow. So the normal flow of our code is simply line 1 does something, line 2 does something, line 3 does something, okay? And if I bundle things into functions, I can say all of these lines run at the same time, or sequentially before I go to the next line. That's all normal, and you're used to that. And you have things like event handlers, like when the user taps on something, run this bundle of code, that occurs asynchronously. But right now, and I guess the timer that we set up in the first week was kind of this. But now we're going to set it up so that we're going to write some code that only runs when the significant change location has occurred. Okay? Cool. So outside of view.did_load, I'm going to use a built-in bit of location manager. And location manager has a bunch of stuff that I can mess with. But the one that I want, I'm too lazy to read all those. The one I want is this one. And this is saying, okay, I have a location manager. It is a core location manager, and it only fires when dead update locations occurs. And when I do that, I want to create an array of location data called locations. So this function inside of itself will create a new variable called locations, and we'll be able to use locations later, but only in the context of this function. The second this function is over, locations disappears. So there's going to be, inside of this function, there's an array of locations. Typically, locations is just one element long, which is the user's most current location. But in weird times, like if the user is moving very, very fast, that locations array will be multiple elements long and contains all, their most recent reads of locations. Because remember, all of this stuff is managed behind the scenes for like battery life and all that kind of stuff. So it is entirely possible you could be running in the background and not get alerted when they walk between two stores that are adjacent to each other, but would get alerted when they walk into the parking lot. Does that distinction make sense? So this locations is not reliable. You should never think of this as being an array of stuff that always has 5 things in it, or the last 10 places the user been at, or anything like that. What it is different all the time and is squirrely. So instead, usually what people do, and you can use this, you can do other stuff with this if you care to, but usually what we do is just get the last element out of the locations array, because that's the most recent one. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. And so that's just an array, and we looked at way back in the day how to modify arrays, so we've done like append and all that kind of stuff. But locations.last will just get the last element out of the array. And that element is not just a string, and it's not just an int, and it's not just a float, it's an object that contains a ton of location data. The specific location data is this right here that it's going to contain. So it contains longitude, latitude, how accurate we think that it is, how fast we think the user is moving, if they're on a course, what the date stamp is that this location was recorded. So we can't just say, if we want to display locations.last to the user, we can't just spit out latitude and longitude. There's stuff inside of that. And so let's do some stuff with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little bit of functionality that will see how far have you moved since the last location that we picked up. Okay? And it measures it in meters. So if I'm driving, it might trigger every quarter of a mile. If I'm walking around in a mall, it might trigger every 1,000 meters or every 500 meters or something like that. I don't know as the developer what that means. I just know, hey, there's a series of locations. The most current one is this one. This is their longitude and latitude. This is the date stamp, and they've moved this far since the last one. Okay? And so that means I need to start saving what the last one was, because I can't trust locations to contain anything more than just one element. Does that make sense? Cool. So I'm also going to go up here and create a global variable. So not just location managers, but I'm going to create a variable of locations. And it's going to contain CL location data as an array. So an array of those objects that I'm going to use later. That color thing is weird. Did I do something wrong? Nope. I'll call it all locations because that's what I do in the code I'm about to paste. All right, so this is all the locations the user has gone to, all the significant locations the user has gone to since this app has been running. So I'll go back down to my location manager function, and I'm going to write this code. So let me walk you through what this does. The first thing it does is get that locations.last object and out of the array and saves it into a variable called most recent location. And I'm going to use let rather than var because I never want to change most recent location until this function runs again. And that's fine because the second this function is over, that variable doesn't exist anymore. And I'll get rid of this because it's not necessary. Then what I'm going to say is, hey, if all locations, which is that variable we created at the top, if it's 0, in other words, this is the first read of location data, I don't want to do anything because I can't calculate distance between one thing and itself, right? I need at least 2 things. So I'm just saying, hey, make sure that all locations is greater than 1. But if it does that, then, and this is where the fun happens, then go ahead and calculate the distance between the last 2 locations. And I've given this could be called let monkey equal whatever, or let Rudolph equal whatever. Who cares? That doesn't matter, right? It's just a variable name. But I've created a variable called distance between the last 2 locations. And it is set to, remember I said that they have all this superpowers in location data? It's just saying, hey, get the most recent location, which is up here. And I want to calculate the distance of it from this other location, which is the last location that we went to, the most recent location. Or the not the most recent location, the second to last most recent location. And then just print that out, and this is measured in meters. And then at the end of this, take all locations, which is the giant list that I'm creating of all the locations the user has gone to, and add the most recent location to the end of it. Okay? So, this right out of the gate says, okay, get the most recent location, which is where I am right now, and that's coming out of the locations.last array, which is generated by the location manager. So get me where I am right now, that's most recent location. As long as all of my users' locations is greater than 1, in other words, they've gone to more than one place, then calculate the distance between where we are right now and the most recently recorded location that we have. Print it out, and then go ahead and update all the list of locations with the most recent one. So the next time it calculates from where we are now. And when I run this, we won't see anything. Because even if I give the app a location, I'm not moving. And so we need to debug location simulate. Let's do a freeway drive. And now, as it's going, it's as if we're moving 2 to 3 meters every second or so. And if you were to map, which we could do, but we're short on time today. If you were to map what this is, it's just, it's driving through, it's going through, well, this is the highway one. So it starts at like an on-ramp and it drives onto the highway and just goes. Okay, or if I wanted to, I could simulate something slower, like a bicycle ride. So now it's 2 meters a second, 4 meters a second, 3 meters a second, that kind of thing. Okay? And then, if you want to test it, so, this is the user just moving a couple meters every second or so. If I want to test it, I'm going to go ahead and feed it some really far distance. So all of these simulated things are around the Apple campus. And so that's just outside of San Francisco. If I were to give it my current location, this should jump to like 2,000 meters, or 2,000 kilometers or something like that. I'm thinking in terms of miles. But when I hit return, you'll see it'll jump a huge number. There it goes. 3 million meters. It sounds high, but you get the idea. Okay? And then if I were to go back to just cruise around San Francisco, it'll do a huge jump and then slow again. Cool? Yeah.
I just found something. So I'm using the beta version of Xcode. I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but I had to do 3 rows of privacy. It like shot me a nil when it's an error.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a nil for anyone.
So there's different.
In the P
Okay.
list, there's like, there's 3. I used location for my project.
Yeah.
And there was like 3 different values you had to add.
Yeah.
What are the 3 different values?
Location, always usage, description, location always, and when in use description, and then location when in use description.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that's for okay. That other strings are for things like in the settings screen. What do you want to show next to location data to the user in the settings screen? So if they've turned off location in their privacy settings, that kind of stuff. So I forgot about that. Sorry about that. But it's the same deal, and it gives you the same. I'm sure it gives you the similar error message, where it's like, go add this to the plist file. Okay, cool. Any questions about this? This is the level of fidelity I want for your technical proof of concepts. Okay? If this is what if you need to show stuff to the user to prove that you can do it, great. If not, if it literally is just writing some crap out to the console, I'm happy with that too. So it could be something as simple as, I want to read the total number of calories that the user has consumed out of in a given day. And you just print out the calories here, and then you go into the health app in the simulator and show me in a recording that you have previously logged X number of calories, and look, X in the health app matches in the health app matches X in the console. That's fine. Okay? So that's what needs to be done by the 17th. Okay? You all good? Great.